Okay.
Yeah.
Buongiorno tutti. I'm sorry, that's the only Italian I do know. I love the language. I love the speed. I love the sound of it. It sounds very, it doesn't matter what you say, it sounds very passionate. I like that. My name is Olav Maassen. As the introduction said, I wrote the book Commitment together with Chris Matz, who's on the slides. In normal life, I'm an agile coach. I help companies become more effective. And before we start with the presentation, I'd like to teach you a little magic trick. And it will make you more active. So I would like to ask you all to put your hand like this. Okay, and now try to turn it without turning the wrist. So we want to have it in that position without turning the wrist. It's hard, right? Okay. So if we ask something big, that's hard. Now, I'll have you some small instructions, and we can do this all together. So we start like that. Now raise your arm in front of your body. Move it forward. Move it up. In front of the body. And forward. Now, without turning the wrist, you actually accomplish this. So, making things smaller actually makes it easier. So the first thing that we'll do is watch a small clip from the TV series House. Do you have that in Italy?
Yeah.
Okay. I heard you have it in Italian. I unfortunately have it in English. It's a small clip of about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, and they discuss a situation with a patient that they have. And he's ill, and either he has Hep E or he has lupus. Okay, so let's watch.
Do you want to continue talking about me, or should we discuss what the liver damage tells us? I was born in a log cabin in Illinois.
Hemolytic anemia doesn't cause liver damage. Add the fact he's coughing blood, you've got 3 of the indicators of organ-threatening lupus.
It's moving too fast. Could be hepatitis E.
There's only been 1 case of Hep E originating in the U.S. since
His history says he's been in and out of the country 4 times in the last year.
You really think he's got Hep E?
No, I think lupus is way more likely.
All right, then let's start him on IV Cytoxan and plasmapheresis.
No, we should rule out Hep E. You just said it wasn't Hep E.
I said lupus is way more likely, but if we treat for lupus and it is Hep E,
he's toast.
Exactly.
But there isn't a treatment for hepatitis E. Either he'll get better on his own or he'll continue to deteriorate.
Yeah, I went to medical school too.
Start him on Solumedrol.
If he's got Hep E, that's only going to make him worse.
Not as much. It's Goldilocks, people. Won't hurt him so much that it'll kill him, and it won't hurt him so little that we can't tell. It'll hurt him just right. And if it does nothing,
We'll know it's not Hep E and can start training for lupus.
now watch me do it while drinking a glass of water.
What do we tell the dad? We think your kid has lupus, so we're going to treat him from hepatitis E. And oh yeah, if it really is Hep E, we're not actually giving him Hep E medication. So it's going to make him worse, not better?
You think you'll go for that?
So you want us to lie?
No. I want you to lie.
Why me?
Because he trusts you.
So they have this patient that has either lupus or Hep E. So if he has lupus and they treat him for lupus, smiley face, he's alive, he gets better. Excellent. If he actually has Hep E and they give him the medicine for lupus, he's dead, which is kind of a serious commitment at that point. So if he has lupus and we treat him for Hep E, he'll actually get worse. So we're not really helping him, he's just making it bad. And if he has Hep E, actually there is no medication, so he'll either get better or worse, we can't help him. So instead of trying to guess what the right answer is, they want to get more information. They actually postpone making a decision until they have the available information that they need. And the information they need is to actually identify what's happening. And to do that, they come up with this solution where they use solumendrol, which if he has lupus, it has no impact. And if he has hep E, it will actually hurt him, but it won't kill him, which is good. And that way, they can actually do something to the system, the patient, and get more information out before they actually make the real decision. So it's about postponing the decision, postponing something that's really bad, it's a real commitment. So together with Chris Matz in 2006, we came up with this model that we call real options. It's based on financial option theory, and we try to make it as simple as possible. And we came to these 3 sentences. And it's 12 words, which says, options have value, options expire, never commit early unless you know why. Now, of course, it makes sense that an option has value. If I can do something that has a particular value, sure. But we mean a little bit more than that. Just the fact that you can still choose to do something has an extra value. It's not just the value of doing it, it's the value of that you can still change. And we're not always talking about monetary value. So if you would like to visit Cuba, for instance, at this point you can still visit Cuba. It's likely in the future, or possible, let's be careful, it's possible that sometime there will be a regime change and you can no longer visit Cuba. So the fact that you can do that at this point has a value. The fact that you can change your mind later, that is valuable because you have more information at that point. Options expire. Options expire means that at some point you no longer are able to do something. So for instance, the Cuba thing, at some point it's no longer available to you. And this is not just time-based. It could be that it's an expiry date, that there's just no longer available, but also that conditions change. And then the last thing is a bit of an escape clause where we say, never commit early unless you know why. Which means if you are choosing something that you are then stuck to, that you have to do at that point, you better know very sure why you're doing it. Have people heard about the last responsible moment, by the way? Okay. If you have, forget that term. You'll see it on website and people talk about last responsible moment, like you must wait until the last responsible moment because at that point you have all the information available. Well, I call the last responsible moment the first irresponsible moment. Because if you miss that timing, you actually missed it. It's no longer available to you. So you just need to make sure when you do something, you choose it deliberately. So we talk about commitment. What is a commitment? A commitment is something that you have to do. And that could be either by law or by moral belief system or just how you are, or how you operate. It's something that you have to do. Okay. So, quick test here. Traffic laws. Are they actually, you have to obey traffic laws here in Italy?
Yes.
Sort of. Okay.
Not so much.
Not so much. Okay. And then there's the other part of commitment, and that's the reverse of that. That's having an option to do something. So the option to choose, the option to go anywhere. An option to do something means that you have the right to do something, but you're not obligated to do that. So it's your choice if you want to go there or not, or want to do that or not. So let's go through a couple of examples and do that with the waving of hands. So, jumping down a cliff. If you're halfway through, about here, are you committed to jumping off? Yes. Actually, I think it's until about that second frame where he is, that at that point you're just committed to doing that. There's no way back. You're jumping. Right before you jump, you have the option to jump or not. You can choose. After you jump, you're committed. Okay, so now is a test. You have bought a plane ticket. Is that a commitment or is that an option of taking that flight? So who says it's a commitment? Who says it's an option? Okay, so more people say it's an option than a commitment. But what's happening here is that you have a ticket, which means from an airplane perspective, they are committed to transporting you because you bought that right. You can choose to get on the plane or not. So for you, it's still optional. So until when is it optional? When you're at the airport? Is it still optional? Yes. So you've checked in. Is it still optional? Yeah. Okay. You're on the plane. Okay. Important question here. Before takeoff. So you're in the airplane before taking off. So here it becomes a little bit more difficult. Okay. So actually, the funny thing is that there are, as long as the doors are not closed, it's still optional. As soon as they have closed the door, the legal framework changes, and yes, it's optional, but it's very expensive. So, getting married, that's a choice, right? Okay. Most of the time it's a choice. So if you're married, is that a commitment or is that optional? So who says commitment? Who says optional? Oh, interesting. I asked the same question at the book launch in the Netherlands, and when we had a show of cards, so all the red cards were commitment and green cards were it's optional. And we had all red cards, so everybody said it's a commitment, and there was one person saying it's optional, which was my wife. So if you have children, are you committed to them or is that optional? So who says committed? Optional? Yes, okay. In general, we feel we're committed to having a relationship with our children. So as you can see from this example, we encounter this in daily life all the time. We all the time make this, the whole decision process about whether something is a commitment or if something is optional. And we do this all the time. And this applies to real life as well. And what Chris and I are saying with our real options model is that be aware of having options. Being aware of being able to choose at a later time. So why is this so hard? Well, there's a nice little thing in our brain, is that we love to be right. Being right rocks. Like, yes. But then if we can't be right, then there's the option of either being unsure about the answer or knowing for sure you're wrong. Now if I ask you what would you prefer, you'd probably say, well, I think it's better to not know than to know that you're wrong. However, in our behavior, we very much dislike uncertainty. We hate uncertainty. We want to know. So in our observed behavior, what you'll see is that we'd rather be wrong and know the answer now than have the uncertainty that you might be right or wrong later. So this is what makes it a little bit harder. The thing that we do with the real options perspective is that we give bounded uncertainty. So we're not going to decide now, which is uncertain, but we're going to say, well, we're going to decide at that point. Either it's a time or we're going to decide on a given situation. At that point we're deciding. So the amount of uncertainty is smaller, and that makes it more manageable, more acceptable that we're uncertain. back to the guy jumping off the cliff. As we said, as soon as you pass the first jump, you're actually committed to doing that. But because you're aware of when you're entering into a commitment versus something being optional, you can start thinking about it and plan about it. So if you jump down the cliff, it makes sense to take a rope or some way to get back to the previous situation. At that point, you're making decisions reversible. So you're only slightly committed. And this becomes important, because if you jump down a cliff into a valley and nobody can save you, and you want to survive for a month, well, you can do that if you have enough food and water. So you don't care about that much about a rope. At some point you'll be rescued. That's fine. But things change if you break a foot, or there's not enough food, or even if you care about something that will happen in a minute, which is a predator. A lion is waiting for you and trying to eat you. At that point you really care about reversing that situation. So at that point you start thinking about, okay, I want a rope. So why am I telling you about this jumping down a cliff? You don't do that in normal life. But this is very similar to putting something into production. It's very similar to making any change in whatever system that you're working on. So this is where you need to think about, so how quickly do I want to be able to reverse the situation that we're in now? Of course, this never happens in any company that you work for, but I've been into companies where they actually put something in production, found out it's a grave error, losing tens of thousands of euros a minute. You want to reverse as quickly as possible. So that's why you need to think about those kind of things beforehand. And if you know that beforehand, you can bring the rope. You can adapt your system so you can reverse very easily. Now the thing here is that you have to look at it from a perspective, how long does it take me to recover? So how long does it take to get back to the previous situation, compared to how long can I survive there? It's either you as a person or you as a company. If it takes longer to recover than the time that you can survive, you die, which is very common sense, and you don't want to do that. So you need to look at, what options do I have? How can I reverse things? How can I make sure that the system is adaptable enough to allow me that flexibility? And that's something that you can think of beforehand, and you can put the options in place. And if you have the options in place, you start monitoring the conditions. As we said, options expire. So we know at which conditions these options expire. Monitor those. And keep track of them and know what to do when something happens. You don't want to be, so for instance, a big gaming company, I won't name names, will have their database hacked with all the credit card details. Happened a year and a half ago. What you'd like to do is have a strategy in place that everybody knows what to do when that happens. That's a major crisis. It's a major threat to you as a company. What you don't want to do is have a DBA decide on what to do in that kind of a situation. He should already know. So these are the strategies and the scenarios you have to think about, and how do we deal with those. And it's not about probability. It's not about the chance of something happening. It's really about being aware that this can happen and knowing what to do when it happens. So the real options model. Options have value. Options expire. Never commit early unless you know why. Chris and I wrote a book about this. And this is not a book promo, because I don't have books with me to sell, so I'm not selling you the book. I hope to convince you of the idea, of course. The idea of the theory, not the book. But we apply this when we're doing things. So this is a natural way for us of doing things. So the book, Commitment, is a graphic novel about managing project risk, which means it's a comic. Very easy to read. And we apply our own theory when doing this. So for instance, we wanted to have a graphic novel, and Chris decided to draw some things, and after we've seen that, we decided to hire a professional artist. And we started looking for the artist. And we started at the top. So V for Vendetta is that known here? V for Vendetta? Yeah. Okay. So written by Alan Moore, drawn by David Lloyd. So we approached David Lloyd. Who would he recommend? So he recommended two people, two new artists. And we approached both of these artists if they were interested in working together with us on a slightly different project than they're used to. And we gave them an assignment of drawing two different pages. And one was with a scene that described an atmosphere that we wanted to see. And the other one was really scripted of what happens when. And we'll look at that second page. And they had the same description. It's really a man and a woman being in the elevator, having a short conversation, and she walking away. And to the left is one artist, and to the right is another artist. So at that point we could have just looked at it and decided what we liked best and go with that. However, we would like to have, before going into such a commitment, which is serious to us, we're going to get more information. So we went to the ALE conference in Berlin, and we asked people, what do you like? And in general, people like this one better. Slight preference there. And then we asked why. So why do people like that? And it turns out that this page was too dark. And then exploring that further, if it was less dark, they would actually prefer this one because of the style. Most important feedback that we got from that conference is from a woman, Ivana Gancheva, who said that she was completely fed up with the stereotypical role of a woman in IT and then having a more mature male being the mentor, as in this case. So we changed that to her younger sister in the story. And that way we gathered more feedback before entering into that commitment. So we ended up choosing Chris Geary. And then we started writing the book. And Chris Geary really helped us here. There's a standard structure to stories that you'll see in every good story, every good movie has the same structure, which is explained by the writer's journey that explains it based on Star Wars. So we had that as a structure. Then we had all the theory that we wanted to have in the book, and then we created the story itself from there. And the green ones to the left are the structure, the red ones are story, and all the yellow stickies are theories that we want to have in the book. And we did that in 14 hours in one day, and we had the basic structure. And I think that not a lot of that structure changed. We changed a lot of details, but at that point we were committed to having that structure and building from there. Funny thing is that the thing that we discussed most on that day was her hair of the main character, Rose. So why is it important? Well, she's the main character. If we would have her in every page and we would be 60% through the book and decided, yeah, she had black hair, we'd not like to have it blonde. That means we'd have to redraw all the pages. So that we had to make sure that we had that right at the start. So we do commit early on some things, but we know why. Because it's too expensive to change it later. Then Chris and I wrote the first manuscript, basically Google Docs. I love Google Docs. We were working on Google Docs and on Skype. So we were almost never together. Chris was in London, I was in the Netherlands. And then Chris Geary, the artist, took that and wrote a more structured story. And then you have these really ugly scribblings here. Well, it's ugly because we actually blew it up. It's that big. It's like really small. But it helps us to see the flow of the story. And then we added the dialogue so we can actually read through it and see it before we commit to having it drawn up. Because that he can do in 10-15 minutes. A complete page will take a day. So we take a little bit of expense at the start to have a better result at the end. So again, this is option theory applied. We pay a little bit of premium to know for sure that we get the right result. And from that, he actually builds the whole full page. And as I said, it's hard to change things. Well, Chris Geary in the end told us there is this new tool that they have, Photoshop. They can actually make small changes. So we changed this guy to a different guy. But if we took that risk, and we can do that because it's a small expense. So that's fine. Then what we did, we also have it translated because it's a graphic novel. It has less words. As I mentioned, in 2006, Chris and I decided to write a book. And then Luke Homan in 2009 recommended a book by Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics. Great book. And it tells you how comics work. And naive as we were, we thought, well, less words means less work. And that's not true. Actually, writing a graphic novel is more work than doing a regular book. But the good thing is, because it's a graphic novel with less words, you can actually have it translated more easily because you have less words to translate. So we had a translation team in all of Europe, having it in 15 different languages, including Flemish and Catalan. One language missing. Which one is that? Italian. So we're looking for volunteers to do that. But the reason that we used translators and not reviewers is that as a translator, you have to read every word. So you have to understand it and think about it and make that right. So we have these 30 people that we know for sure have read all the words before we actually published the book. Again, getting more information before we commit to anything. In February this year, we went to a comic conference. So we had this little booth. That's Chris Matz. That's Chris Geary, the artist. And we did a test. So we had designed several different covers. And I apologize for the quality of the picture, but the story is so funny that we'll use it anyway. So we had this really sketchy cover. Then we had the cover that we made right at the start, and this is the cover that we had created for a particular conference. And we put them on display, and we just wanted to observe what's happening. So, which book would people pick up? So what do you think? Any preferences? Sorry? The sketchy one. Cool. Any other takers? On the right? Okay. So what we observed was that people would pick up the middle book. So that's interesting. So we thought people might like that cover. But software geeks as we are, we want to test our test. So what if we put them in a different order? So what do you guess happened? People picked the middle book. So it's important to, if you're gathering information, make sure that you gather the right information. And test your test. Your assumptions might be wrong. And then we asked people what they liked, and then people in general like this type of a cover more if they thought about it. But it's just funny to see that their behavior said something different. So last example from the book, it has to do with contracts. Chris and I really like the option to choose. If you enter into a contract, you're actually committed to something. We decided to work with Chris almost 2 years ago, actually more than 2 years ago, September 2011. To this date, we do not have a contract. Which is interesting because we paid Chris Geary a lot of money to do the comics. And the reason for that is we like to avoid commitments if we can. And the funny thing that we saw was because each of us has the option to choose to go away, we had to treat each other nicely. Because if we would upset Chris Geary, the artist, he would walk away. We had nothing. If he would do poor work, we can choose to take a different artist. So there's this whole option to, because we have these options, we have to think in each other's interests. As soon as we enter into a contract, well, we can point to a contract, and that hardens the communication, that hardens the relationship. So having those options available improves relationships, is my opinion. Now, what does this all have to do with IT? Because all these examples are from real life. Well, I think this applies to real life, and it applies to IT. So do we know what this is? A Kanban board, yes. We'd like to call it a visualization board, but Kanban board is correct as well. You can also say it's a Scrum board that has evolved from where a Scrum team started. So what's happening here? You said it's Kanban board. What does this mean? What do you see here from a pattern perspective?
An impediment.
You see an impediment. Here's an impediment.
Yeah.
Is there something else you see?
A bottleneck.
We see a bottleneck. So we have these testing. There's only one item that they're working on in testing, and then there's this huge line in front of that waiting to be tested, and then there's development work in front of that. So from this, just this picture, we can assume there is a bottleneck on the testing capacity. Cool, fair enough. Next picture would be, okay, so what's happening here? Well, we see something similar. Now we see a huge queue in front of production. Again, this is a visualization board. The last one, if you solve that, we actually get things into production and we solve things. If you look at your situation at your company, things that we come across often is that project managers would like to have the best people on their project. You see that happening? It makes sense, of course. You want to have the best people available. However, there is a problem with that. It's because you want to have the best people on your project. Your colleague project manager would like to have the same best people on his project as well, and the third one and the fourth one as well. So what happens is that these project managers escalate problems to make sure there is a problem, then they escalate up top. So they have to have that single Francesco that's on that project, they need it on his project, and they get their way because, well, that's the most important project, of course. But that causes a problem with the other project. So they wait until they have real problems, they escalate up to management, and then they get Lucio from that project. Now we need him here. So we have this shift around of all these problems all the time. Nobody gets any rest, and we don't have any predictability. If you look at it from an option perspective, you get to a different strategy. What you can do is have your team members rate themselves on the scale of 1 to 3, which is very easy to do on the different skill sets that we have, that we need. So the feeds development, core development, testing, deployment, and even other things like making tea. And they rate themselves. And we can see, well, we have 3 out of 4 experts on the feeds development. So that's green. We don't see any problems there. On the core development, we have 2 experts. That's yellow. The other things, we actually are in trouble. Because we either have no experts or just 1 expert. If you now divide people over projects or even over tasks, most commonly used, we see that the experts will pick it up and then try to teach people later if they actually have the time, which they never do. From an option perspective, those people with the highest skills in the most different areas provide you with the most options. You have the option to choose where to put them, and that's very valuable. So instead of always getting the best people, get some people who know a little bit about it and some of the juniors and divide them amongst the projects first, and then not assign any of these experts you have. And look at it from a what we call staff liquidity perspective. So in order to change given certain situations, we want to divert some of the people to a different project so we can help projects. And want to have the experts to be available to do that, because we like to have experts on the team. But then we don't allow them to do actually let them do anything. They're just there to help the team and get their level up as well. So you will take an initial penalty, you will take a premium, you will pay a little bit more for the fact that you can choose later. But they provide you with the most options. This is staff liquidity. This is something that project managers in general do them even without thinking about it for their own project. So 2 more examples of private life. I've heard that to women, shoes on their wedding day are important. Is that correct? So a friend of ours, Christine, on her wedding day, actually before her wedding day, ordered 4 different pairs of shoes. So instead of choosing beforehand, about 6 or 8 weeks before, she actually had ordered the shoes beforehand, and on the wedding day itself, she tried them on, all of them, and at that point decided which ones she really liked for that day, and sent the other 3 back. So that's a way of looking at going into a commitment, which is the shoes on your wedding day, and deciding at the latest responsible moment, I'm not using that term, but you have the options to choose. There is a value. You have the best shoes for that day. Last example of this is an example from the Brickell Key Award, which is given every year by the Kanban community to outstanding contributions to the Kanban world. And the people on that committee are all across the world, and they have 6 nominees to choose from, and they have to agree on a time where to decide actually who's going to be the winner. Complicating factor here is that the award itself is a big crystal thingy with the name of the winner inside. Production time for this is 4 weeks. So they need to know at least 4 weeks beforehand who will be the winner. Problem is they don't have the time. And they don't meet anywhere on the world until the actual award ceremony, and they're all in the same place. So that would be the ideal day when they can decide. But they have to decide beforehand. And they solve this by ordering the statues about 6 weeks prior for each of the nominees. So they have 6. At that conference, a day before the award ceremony, they're all in the same room. They can actually talk to each other and decide. And they're going to decide on the 2 winners that they have. And they destroy the other 4 statues. And they cost about 500 euros each. So they're destroying serious money. So that is a premium that they pay to be able to choose at a later time. Options have value, options expire, never commit early unless you know why. So this is an example from Pascal van Kouwenbergen. So do you have a Santa Claus in Italy? How's he called? Sorry, Papa? Papa Bonatal? Papa Bonatal. Okay. In the Netherlands and in Belgium we have Sinterklaas, which is basically Santa Claus but a few weeks earlier. So we get the presents sooner. So this is from a real project that has to release a new game. And it has to be available for the festivities in December. In order to be there, we actually have to make sure it's in the shops. And it has to be in the shops by the start of November. So people can actually pick it up and buy it. And then we have some production time in the front, which means we're producing a DVD in the box and we have the servers to set up. And that needs to be done by the start of October. And we're currently in March. So we have some time. And then we had a discussion about whether to go with the yellow existing design, and maybe if we have time change that to the blue design, or start with a blue design straight away. Of course that impacts, because if you would go for the blue and you go for the blue design and you don't finish it on time, and you miss this window, you're screwed. There's nothing to sell. If you go with just the yellow old one, you might just stick with the old one. You actually want to have the new design. So, when can we choose? When is it ready? Well, there's design and testing in front of that, which takes 2 months. Okay? So that takes us to August. So we need to be done in August. And then the team just looked at the different designs and what can we change to make it differently that we have the option to choose later, so that we commit at a later date. The trick is that they could actually reduce design and testing to 1 month if they change some things on the design. And the other thing is that if they would change their architecture just a little bit, they can postpone that decision on which design to do. So they have a little bit more time, get more information, see if they can actually finish it on time, and then at that point really decide. So you must pay a small premium to be able to decide at a later time. And this is a recurring theme over and over. So what do I'd like you to take away from this? Focus on when you're making a commitment. We're making decisions all the time. There's nothing wrong with deciding. It's really when you feel that you're committed either legally or emotionally to a particular route or a particular action. At that point you're into a commitment. And we have plenty of examples that there's this whole shift, and we saw that from some of the earlier examples, that there's this gray area. So when is something optional, when is something a commitment? It really depends on you and your moral belief system and your whole framework. But when you're aware of this, you will see them. And I hope that after this talk you'll actually see options continuously and be aware of them and start playing with them and start using them properly. Understand the difference between a commitment and a decision. As I said, decisions you're doing all the time. It's really about the commitment and trying to postpone that condition or that time where you actually enter into a commitment and get more information. So do you need a rope to be able to climb back up? If you have that rope, use it, make sure it's there, use it. So the key takeaways: be aware of options, be aware of commitments, and for the rest of the conference, if you go into a talk, ask yourself these 2 questions. How does this provide options to me? How does this allow me to make decisions later or make better decisions? And how does it allow me to push conditions to a later date so I can gather more information and get into a better situation? If you'd like to know more about this, you can read the book. It's available on our website. And of course you can send me emails or reach me through Twitter. I'd love to do that. I love engaging with people. If you have any questions, discussions, we love that. And of course you can contact Chris Matz as well. With that, I would like to close. I'd like to thank you. If there are any questions. Any questions?
I was a little bit interested in your definition when you say never commit early unless you know why. And actually that may translate commit early if you can. But from a pure business perspective, does it make a difference from your point of view? I mean, if you have time and you know why, you can commit. But is there a reason why you may want to wait somehow? But does this, say, not making a decision on a commitment introduce additional risk?
Okay, so yes, that's the whole thing why we're saying never commit early unless you know why. It's the knowing why. So I, in my business life, do enter into commitments early, so I know why, to actually get more information, which leads to different decisions or different commitments, so I can make better decisions over there. And I don't want to postpone everything. I don't want to keep everything optional because that will drive me crazy. I cannot monitor all the things all the time. So you'll enter into commitments and be sure when that happens, and just the fact that you're aware of them will help you get into a better situation. So if you still have the option to choose, you can choose to do something different. If it's in a competitor-like situation, you might want to choose to have your product released earlier to grab the market sooner. You can also choose to actually do it later and see what the competitor does and then mirror that and then go into the market. So it's very much about the awareness of when you commit into something. And yes, it does expose you to potential risk. If you enter into a commitment, you've taken a decision and that's that. Whether it's more or less risk, I don't know. The problem is that if you enter into a commitment, you're stuck to that route and you accept the risk that goes with that. If you still have the option to choose, you have the opportunity to avoid certain risks that you have and still get that information and do something different.
Yeah, true, but if you have too many options.
That's correct, and I agree, but having many options, from what you say, may reduce the risk. Having too many options is already risk.
Yes. And having too many options is risky as well if you're not able to monitor all the conditions that are available. If you have some way of doing that, you can have more options. It's really and I think at some point it's also it becomes automatic in the way that I avoid certain commitments just purely on automatic pilot. Other things I really think about and monitor carefully. It really depends on how important you think certain things are. Any other questions before the break? No? Well, thank you very much. Love being here.